my name is Ken Reimer, and I'm an assistant professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of Winnipeg in Canada, and I'm here to do a short presentation for you. My presentation is titled COVID and Post-Secondary Inclusion, Planning for Today and Tomorrow. COVID-19 has certainly brought about many challenges for all students here in Canada and around the world. School closures, university closures, post-secondary closures that have been caused from the COVID-19 pandemic have really forced school leaders and educators all over the world to shift from providing traditional methods of instruction to, in large part, an online learning environment. And while online learning is not a new concept to the field of education, the sudden shift has certainly been a great challenge, and for some more than others. It's a daunting task to have done and completed in a relatively short period of time, and transitioning to a virtual school setting has forced many educators to learn new technologies and skills, and this has caused great stress to teachers, to educators, to faculty and staff, and to students. You put on top of that the inequity of really COVID-19 and the move to from traditional to more technology-based forms of instruction has really highlighted and exposed a lot of equity issues and challenges faced by many students, but especially students with disabilities. And a lack of equity is exhibited by the disproportionate access of technology and internet access for many students who live in rural and low-income communities. Some of the issues that are faced by students with disabilities or impairments is not just the technological issues, but also being able to have access to special education or inclusive education services. For example, there's been great difficulties for many students with disabilities who need access to speech, occupational or physical therapies. And inaccessible technologies has been a significant challenge. And you put on top of that the lack for the little training that's being received by faculty instructors. So certainly we've had a lot of challenges. Noah Pino, who published in the Canadian Journal of Learning and Technology, says that the three biggest challenges for online learning are interactivity, authenticity, and support. By interactivity, what Opino is talking about is the connection, the interactiveness that the teacher or faculty member or class instructor can have with the students. And not just limited to that, but the interaction that students can have with other students has really been limited with this sudden shift from traditional or in-person learning to online learning. And the lack of interactivity amongst faculty and students or students and students has really been a big challenge. And this is something that in the future needs to be addressed. The second issue that Opino talks about is authenticity. Providing sincere, meaningful, connected to real life practice instruction has been a challenge for many with this new online learning environment. And authenticity is a challenge that Opino says that universities need to address. The final one is support. And this was touched upon a little bit earlier. Opino says that supports are not always there for students. And I would say in particular, students with disabilities, students who require additional supports, those have not been readily available with the limited access that students have to actually being on campus. These supports have greatly diminished and therefore exposed many inequities. Because I'm in the Faculty of Education here in Canada, and part of it is a compulsory requirement that students do school practicums. And that's exactly what it sounds like. Students leave the campus typically, they leave their classrooms and they go into K-12 school classrooms here in Manitoba, the province where I live, and they do a certain amount of practicum, and it's required that they do these workplace or school place practicums in order to receive their degree. Well, work practicums, work placements, school practicums were greatly reduced when during the COVID pandemic. In fact, 35% of all Canadian university students state that they had a work placement canceled or delayed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. We certainly had education students who had their work placements, their school practicums canceled, delayed, significantly altered over the past 18 months because of the pandemic. This mainly affects students completing the program, that is graduating students. And that certainly was a situation here in our Canadian universities and our faculties of education. And 52% of the students who had a work placement or a practicum delayed or canceled were very concerned. And I think for good reason that their credentials would be considered less valued. And this is mainly based on the work of Wall, who published in Statistics Canada. So what are some recommendations for school administrating according to Smith? Smith says that there are 5 recommendations for university administration as we transition from a traditional method of offering university education to a more online or hybrid version. Number 1, Smith says that local training needs to happen for all faculty and staff, and not just in terms of technology, also on the importance of social-emotional learning, on relationship building, on collegiality, and of course, last but not least, for faculty and staff, ensure that their caseloads are manageable. These are very tough times, and so the more that you can have manage those workloads and make them, so that faculty and staff can be successful as they teach in this new environment, the better. Mental health. There are many mental health challenges that students across the globe are facing, and certainly in Canada, we are not immune to this. Morris, Short, Bridges, Crichton, Belander, and Rush have done some work on this, and this is an article I would encourage people to look into. But they've reported, these university educators in Australia and Canada, that COVID-19 is affecting the resilience and mental health of students and their ability to successfully engage in academic programs. And basically, this is something that we need to be aware of and create resources and supports for all students and faculty and staff. So some more recommendations from Morris et al. Is number 1, make sure that you review and engage in an active review of policies, all your policies for your post-secondary education. Some of those include your policies and review of attendance, missed deadlines, course extensions, eligibility requirements. Take a look at all of these. Look in terms of providing and engaging in internal advocacy, and try and create maximum flexibility around these things where possible. Even issues such as students having financial burdens and being unable to pay for their courses. Try and find maximum flexibility around these within your policies. Number 2, Morris et al. Advise that you clearly articulate and communicate all the parameters of course and program flexibility to support students during COVID-19. Because while you want to be flexible, we also understand that there is rationale for limits to be put in place in order to maintain program integrity and professional accountability of the practice in which you are instructing students in. And so you want to make sure that you provide and clearly articulate and communicate the rationale for why flexibility is one thing, and yet there needs to be accountability as well. Reduce the stigma of alternative academic pathways. Now's the time to explore different avenues or ways that students can be successful in perhaps one day getting the career that they want, or studying a certain way that they want that may look different than the typical traditional ways of doing things, and try and reduce the stigma of students choosing these alternative pathways. Finally, advocate and support institutional efforts. And we're talking about increasing mental health support, peer support, self-care planning, and connection on behalf of socially isolated students without necessarily having the need for medical recommendations. So Metz et al. Have listed a number of ways in which implementation sometimes fails. So school administration, faculty, staff, they can all make the best plan they want. And yet sometimes when they bring in a new plan for this new current and post-COVID world that we're going into, they sometimes fail. And there are a number of reasons why implementation plans sometimes fail, despite the best plan ever being written up. Here are the ways that Metz et al. Talk about. Number one, is your institution ready? Does your institution have the necessary structure in place to implement the new plan? Are all the stakeholders, faculty, staff, support staff, students, administration, your board, are they all engaged and on board? How do we build this new plan into the current system? Is your institution ready to adapt and innovate as required? How does your institution get and use feedback? And how does your institution evaluate for success? So some recommendations as you implement a new plan, wherever you're working. Number one, read and review literature for foundational knowledge. Baker et al. Say that this is the first thing to do. Rather than just come up with a plan based on your own thoughts, try and get into the literature and the published work out there at this time and see if you can create a plan based on the knowledge that has already been accrued. When you make a plan or implement a plan, make sure that you ask yourself these questions and check off these issues. What are your specific community wants and needs? There is no one universal plan for everyone. There needs to be something that addresses your community wants and needs. Create an advisory board specific to current and post-pandemic issues that are arising. Meet with people in groups on campus and talk to them about your plan. Review your plan with them. This could be your advisory board, but also invite all stakeholders at some point to take a look at it. Klein talks about the pre-mortem, which literally means before death. So before your plan dies, go to people, the stakeholders that are going to be living in your new implementation plan and ask them for scenarios in which something could go wrong and try and clean that up before it actually happens. What is your university mission and community need, and how are you still meeting that? How are you going to fund this? Because this stuff is getting expensive. Technology is expensive. Training is expensive. So how are you going to fund this? And develop a future research plan so that you can determine the efficacy of your plan and adapt as required. Finally, getting off the ground, you now are going to implement. It's really important to do whatever you can to retain the students you currently have, but also you're going to want to recruit students and continue to grow. And so how are you going to do that? How are you going to recruit mentors and use these mentors to be part of the new building process? How will you raise and grow awareness? And how are you going to evaluate? That's all I have. I'm Ken Reimer from University of Winnipeg. Thank you very much for listening and best of luck.